Hi everybody and welcome once again to Ruby's Classic Cooking. Today I'm making applesauce. And I'm going to read my recipe for this because it's very, very generic and kind of funny. Use tart, well-flavored apples which break up readily on cooking. Well, I'm using gravenstein apples today and they do all of those. Wash, remove stems and blossom ends. Cut in quarters. Place in saucepan and add water to about 1 inch below the top of the fruit. Simmer until the fruit is tender. Press fruit through a puree or coarse sieve. Add sugar to taste and a dash of salt. Cook 3 minutes longer, stirring frequently. You see that? Didn't say a thing about how many apples to use, how much it's going to produce, how much sugar to use, nothing. So, it's kind of one of those you're on your own kind of recipes, so it's sort of, I'm going to do some suggestions here. Let's see, I've got 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, I've got 12 apples here, and I'm going to use that as a starting point. That's the thing about applesauce, you can use 6 apples or you can use 60 apples. All depends on how big the pot is you want to use and how much applesauce you want to make. Applesauce is a delicious treat for your kids' school lunches or for you to take to work or snack on at home, or you know what, it's great with roast pork. I'm going to dive right into this recipe. Here's my pot I have for my applesauce. It's a good sized saucepan, a good heavy bottom, that's what you need. Now I'm not necessarily going to follow all of their directions, but I am going to cut my apples in quarters, and you notice it didn't say to peel them. You don't have to peel them. But I do like to remove the cores because then you don't have to deal with the seeds and the sharp bits from the core inside when you finished your applesauce. What you want is a variety of apple that will break up nicely when you're cooking them. You don't want an apple that stays hard because it's hard to make applesauce out of it. These gravensteins will do that wonderfully well. It's simple and easy, and you can freeze it. You can can it, whatever you want to do to it. Now personally, I'm going to freeze this. I'm probably going to put them in some zipper bags, although I also have 1 cup and 2 cup containers that are the semi-reusable kind of plastic ones that you can put in your freezer, and they're great for this. So I'm just going to break these up, cut these apples up. And I don't usually put that much water with my applesauce. If you have a really dry variety of apple, you might want to add more water, but I usually only add about 1 inch of water, like in the bottom of my pan, to get my apples going. Because that's the thing about gravensteins, is they're quite juicy. Now, I'll give you a tip too about apple tarts. If you want to make an open apple tart, and the easiest way to do that is to buy some of those frozen tart shells. You have your frozen tart shells. Take some of your apples and put them in a microwave safe container and put them on, chop them up, let them cook a little bit in the microwave until they are a little bit soft and starting to break up, so they just have chunks in them, because then you can take a big spoonful of that and you can fill your little tart shell and you'll have actually some apple in your apple tart, which is a big deal when you're trying to eat an apple tart that has a few little bits of apple in it and a whole lot of pastry. I don't know about you, but I eat a tart for the filling, not for the pastry. There you have it. My apples are all ready to go on to make applesauce. That's 12 apples, and I've added about that much water to my pot. I know, very precise, serious measurements here. As this cooks down, I think I'm going to add maybe a teaspoon of cinnamon to this, or a teaspoon of nutmeg, and then it will be more like an apple pie filling. It'll give it a little more flavor than just the apples. But don't go too crazy on the sugar when you're making applesauce, because you want the natural flavor of the apple to come through. And in fact, with some varieties, you won't even need to add any sugar. You'll just, you know, taste it and say, that tastes pretty good without any sugar at all. So if you're not canning it, then you don't need to preserve it with sugar, so you don't have to put a whole lot of sugar in it, which is great. I might put 1/4 of a cup in this whole batch of applesauce, maybe if it needs it, but I'll be tasting it to see if it needs any sugar. I'll be back after my apples have cooked down and I'll show you how I strain them. Hi everyone, I'm back again, and here is my pot of apples. Now it's about a half an hour later, and I've been cooking these on the stove and stirring them from time to time, and as you can see, they've broken right down to applesauce, and there are still a few lumps here. Now what I'm going to do to process this is I'm just going to dump my applesauce in through my strainer here, just my good old Tupperware strainer. You can use a metal one, whatever kind of strainer you've got, or one of those collapsible ones, those are good too. Anyway, so this is just going to go right into here. There, all of it will fit. Look at that, a dozen apples right into my big strainer. And of course I'm going to clean out my pot. Don't want to leave half a cup of applesauce in here in my pot. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to encourage this applesauce to go through my strainer. I'll use my big wooden spoon for this. I've already added a good sprinkle of salt to this from my salt shaker by the stove, and I'm probably going to add about 1/4 of a cup of sugar to this batch because it seems to be just in need of a little bit of sugar to bring out all of the flavor. Now you don't have to use white granulated sugar. You could use brown sugar, you could use corn syrup, you could use honey, whatever kind of sugar you want to use, or a sugar substitute at this point. If you want to use Splenda or stevia or something like that in it, you can do that too. It's totally in your hands since it's your applesauce. Or you can just leave it plain. It's really good plain too, without any sugar added at all. Now I might just leave some of this to cool off for a bit because this is really quite boiling hot. Don't want to burn yourself on hot applesauce, I'll tell you. Not fun. You can see how nice and thick this is, and you saw how much water I added to my pot. That was a dozen apples, and this is about how much applesauce a dozen medium to small medium-sized apples make. That's the thing about applesauce, is it's totally if you want to use 6 apples or 60 apples, if you want to make a giant huge batch, or a small batch if you want to do it in, you can do it up and in. Well, when it comes to doing up applesauce to preserve it, I'm going to just do mine up in zipper bags with the name and date on them. And a trick my sister showed me, when you're freezing something like this, you take a cookie sheet and you lay your bags out on it flat, and then you put it in your freezer overnight to freeze, and then you take it out and all your bags are really, really nice and flat. And then you can stack them up and they'll all stay together in the freezer and you'll be able to find them, which is always a good thing when you're dealing with something like applesauce or something you made at home that you want to, find. I'll just go back to stirring this. You just have to stir it to encourage it and to separate it from the skins that are in here. And then if you don't peel your apples, you haven't lost the potential applesauce that you would have thrown away with your peelings, and saved yourself labor at the same time. Whereas if you've cored and peeled your apples, once they've cooked out, you don't have to do this step because they're all ready to use. So there is that. But when I sieve it, however, any little lumps, and there are a few little lumps of apple, see, there's still a few lumps of apple here that didn't quite cook down. But after half an hour, I figured most of it is cooked, and these will break down as I put them through the sieve anyway, so I didn't wait till it was 100% pureed. You can feed this to a baby as one of their first foods instead of buying strained applesauce. You can, like I said, your kids put it in a little container, send it to school, take it to work for your own lunch. You'll just have a delicious sweet applesauce. And if you happen to be really fond of maple flavor, you could add maple flavor to it, maple syrup to it for your sugar. Like I said, that's completely up to you. Oh, and you can also serve this with gingerbread. Instead of whipped cream, you could add applesauce to it. Sweetened applesauce to gingerbread. Just see my gingerbread recipe that I put up last year. Because applesauce goes really nicely with anything that has ginger in it. So if you happen to be eating some ginger cookies, you could have some applesauce with them. Dunk them in some applesauce. Here's an idea. A taste adventure. At work, you could take some ginger cookies to work and some applesauce, and just dunk your ginger cookies in your applesauce as you're eating them. Now, see how my apple peelings are now starting to get more and more visible here in the bottom of my sieve. And my bowl is filling up nicely with applesauce. I just chose a large mixing bowl to do this in because the sieve fits nicely over top of it. And of course, if all your cooked applesauce doesn't fit in your sieve all at once, you'll have to do it in more than one batch. And I would do it down to the apple skins, and then you can get rid of those apple skins and get some more in, because they're just going to block the holes in your sieve if you leave them in here. Now, when you're freezing this up, you can freeze it up in whatever size packaging works for you and your family. Like me, I'll probably do these up in 2-cup lots, or like 500 milliliter lots, because that works for me and my husband. But if I were doing things for a larger family, of course I'd be doing double that amount in a bag or in a bottle. Because you see, if you do this if I had some sterilized jars right now, glass jars, which I like to sterilize my glass jars in my dishwasher. I put them on the sanitize cycle with the heated dry option on, and I leave them in the sealed dishwasher until I'm ready to use them. Then I would take my hot jars out, and of course you have to use something to handle them with my sterilized lids. And I put them in my canning jars using my canning funnel to scoop them in, fill them up, and then seal them. And as long as the applesauce is hot enough to make them pop, you don't have to then, I don't cook them additionally in a hot water bath, because they're sealed and they're not going to go anywhere. Then you wouldn't have to refrigerate them. You could just put them down in your cold storage and have them in your cold storage. Now personally, I just find it's easier to let it cool off to room temperature and put them in Ziploc bags or in reusable plastic containers, which I also use sometimes. Ones that hold about 2 cups. Now I've pretty much got all my applesauce through my sieve, so I'm just going to add my sugar. This scoop holds 1/4 cup, so I'm just going to sprinkle it in on top of my applesauce. And I'm going to add to that a 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg and a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. I couldn't decide today, so I thought, okay, I'll use a 1/2 teaspoon of each. So here I go with my 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg and a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. There we go. If you have a preference for either one of those, go right ahead. Use all nutmeg or all cinnamon, or don't use any. If I were using hot canning jars, I'd be in some hurry right now to get this bottled while it's still hot. But since I'm not, I'm going to cover this and leave it aside till it cools off to room temperature, and then I'll put it in my plastic bags because I don't want to melt my plastic bags. You just want to keep moving these peelings around until you feel you've got all the apple off of here that you can. And then when you figure you've reached that point, then you just go, okay, I'm done. You just go, I'm done, and you throw your apple peelings in your green bin. If you do that in your neighborhood. Now that's what they look like now. Just mostly apple peeling. Not much appley goodness left on there. Yes, sir. Just get this last little bit of applesauce off the bottom of my strainer. And I think that bit is going to go into my green bin bucket. Well, there you have it, applesauce, and that's from a dozen medium small apples. Now that has made just over 1 liter, which is 4 cups. So it's about 4.5 cups of applesauce, a little bit better than a liter of applesauce. So there you go. So I'll probably be putting this into a couple of these Ziploc bags over here and freezing it up for winter. I hope you enjoyed my video today, and I hope you'll like, subscribe, maybe make a comment or two when you try this out on your own apples at home. And come back and see me next time on Ruby's Classic Cooking. Bye for now.